Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the automatic Colt pistol military model caliber 45, the original 45 automatic Colt pistol cartridge. Some people call it the Model 1905. A light box. Weighing in just over 2 pounds, though some minor variation in weight has been noted over the production life, and with an overall length of 8 inches, this gun is somewhat closer to the pocket Model 38 than the military Model 1902 in scale. It has a detachable box magazine with a capacity of 7 rounds of the then very new 45 ACP cartridge. If you're enjoying this sub-series, make certain to thank our friends at Manticore Arms for making it possible for us to explore these developmental stepping stones to the 1911. They quite literally loaned us the firearms to do these episodes. Thanks, Sven. Just last episode, we discussed Colt's pocket model 38 caliber locked breech automatic pistol, but from a military standpoint of view, that gun practically didn't exist. Instead, the last thing the US government really looked at was this, Colt's military model of 1902. As we saw a few episodes back, these were extremely interesting handguns with a number of advantages over the service revolver. However, it wasn't perfect, and trials, especially in the Philippines, revealed a number of complaints. Let's start with what would be the most significant issue, and yet, especially in the US, the most unclear for a number of years: the caliber. This is the 38 Long Colt, as adopted by the US Army for their Colt New Army revolvers. Being a small-bore smokeless powder cartridge, it had been first adopted by the Navy in black powder. Both at adoption and now a decade later, it remained a point of controversy among US officers. Basically, the little 38 was felt to have too little stopping power, the notion that a singular hit would effectively and near instantly halt an attacker. This is obviously a worry in just about any sort of fighting, but it was becoming especially acute thanks to a unique form of combat that the US was experiencing in the Philippines. Thanks to a brief and very successful war against a now much smaller Spanish Empire, the United States of America found itself a colonial power. In particular to our story today, the US Army would liberate and then occupy the Philippine Islands. Initially, this was welcomed by the locals, but when the Americans didn't leave, they resumed their war for independence. As we saw in our Colt 1878/1902 episode, by 1902 the worst of the fighting was largely resolved. However, there were still lingering problems. The varied peoples of the Philippines were having varied reactions to the continued US presence, and especially thanks to the complex geographies involved, it was very difficult to effectively administer and police the new US colony. All of the forces present, Army, Scouts, and Philippine Constabulary, were forced to, on frightening occasion, defend themselves from guerrilla attack. Usually, these were in the form of poorly armed native fighters blending into the regular civilian population in order to get physically close enough to slash, stab, and otherwise bludgeon the occupiers. Much rarer and even more feared were the juramentado, a man shaved, dressed, and blessed before going on a one-way killing spree. Although their reasons for doing so were more complex than most Americans at the time realized, these were amongst the most feared threats to servicemen on the island. One of the most interesting tactics for these berserkers was to bind their bodies with rope or wire in order to prevent shock from bleeding out, which allowed them to keep attacking even after being hit multiple times. Basically, the army was dealing with surprise melees by determined attackers, and their revolvers were proving inadequate for the job. And we can see just one example of this problem in the much later writing of one Louis Lagarde. A prisoner on the island of Samar attempted to escape on October 26, 1905. He was shot 4 times at close range in a hand-to-hand encounter by a 38 caliber Colt's revolver loaded with US Army regulation ammunition. He was finally stunned by a blow on the forehead from the butt end of a Springfield carbine. This man, by the way, lived. Reports like these can be found littered through period critiques of the 38 Colt cartridge. Many sought to return to the old reliable 45 Colt cartridge, and as we've already seen in our show, that would actually become reality. The near obsolete single-action Army revolvers remained popular with the Army in the Philippines. Despite their slow operation, they were at least seen as man-stoppers. The civilian administration of the Philippine Constabulary would also order their guns in 45 Colt, a cartridge they wanted so badly that they managed to basically ruin the handgun in the process of attempting to use the old, hard-primered surplus ammo. So, while the official cartridge was the 38, The .45 was still in favor, and it was becoming clear the US would only be considering a large bore solution in their next handgun. However, in 1902 and 1903, this was just the thrust of things. It wasn't official, and so it was causing a lot of confusion and delay in the commercial handgun market. The cartridge question really did need to be solved, so in October of 1903, the Chief of Ordnance would start the ball rolling. He sent letters to 2 Army officers, ordering them to convene a board designing a test program. The object in view is the determination of a bullet which will have the stopping power and shock effect at short ranges necessary for a pistol for the military service. And our 2 officers? Well, one was a medical doctor, Major Louis Anatole LaGarde, who was born in April of 1849 in Thibodaux, Louisiana, to a French colonial descended family. LaGarde attended the Louisiana Military Academy at Alexandria and then the Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York, graduating in 1872. Following an internship, he became a junior assistant surgeon at Roosevelt Hospital and soon rose to house surgeon. From there, he accepted an appointment in the Army, which saw him through various postings and even campaigns against the Sioux. LaGarde would actually end up with 15 years of frontier duty, though these were broken up by occasional stays back east. Eventually, he rose to the rank of captain, and in 1892 he was involved in ballistic experiments. Those were primarily aimed at the old .45 Springfield and the new .30 caliber Krag, or at least their ammunition, and its effect on the human body. From there, he was again frequently traveling for the Army, rising to major in 1896. LaGarde's next brush with ballistics would come in the Spanish-American War, where he organized and ran a field hospital in Cuba. He was definitely one of the best educated men at the time on the matter of gunshot wounds. His younger partner on the new board would be John Taliaferro Thompson. Born in December of 1860 in Newport, Kentucky, he was the son of a military man, James Thompson, and basically grew up in the service. John Thompson spent a year at Indiana University before entering the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York, which he graduated in 1882. Entering the Army as a second lieutenant, he went on to both engineering and artillery schools and was assigned to the Ordnance Department in 1890. During the Spanish-American War, Thompson was promoted to captain and sent down to Florida as the chief ordnance officer for the commander of the Cuban campaign. In a conflict riddled with logistical problems, Thompson actually proved himself efficient and effective. Captain Thompson also had a keen eye for small arms technology. He would be heavily involved in the development and adoption of the Springfield 1903 service rifle, which curiously enough was still being modified at this time. Also, as many of us well know, he would go on to develop his own designs for service, but that's a matter for another day. Thompson and LaGarde would convene their board as ordered in October of 1903, which is when they designed a program to test and assess the lethality, with an emphasis on immediacy of various pistol cartridges. Their plans were approved, and they got to work. Now, the Thompson-LaGarde test remains famous until this very day, or perhaps infamous. Some think of it as an unimpeachable proof of the superiority of the big bore pistol, and others suggest that it was poorly conceived and that the tests themselves didn't translate well to real-world terminal performance. Thankfully, I'm not here to argue either case because I'm just a history teller. The US Army commissioned the tests, and they made their next decisions based on its findings. So, what did Thompson and LaGarde actually experiment with? Well, the pistols were fairly straightforward. The current Colt New Army and the larger bored Colt New Service in several variations, the Luger in 2 variations, and the Colt 1902 military model. Cartridges tested included the .30 caliber Luger, an early 9mm Parabellum, the .38 Long Colt, .38 ACP, the .45 Colt service cartridge, and the British .455 and .476 cartridges. All the revolver chamberings really being possible on the new service model. Bullet diameter, weight, and even shape were noted for experimentation. This included some hollow point ammunition and a sort of ball-bearing point. That's actually a topic for another video, I'm sure. 3 locations were used for testing: the Philadelphia Polyclinic Hospital, the New York University Medical Department, and Nelsie Morris and Company's building, Union Stockyards, Chicago, Illinois. That's my least favorite part of the test, if I'm honest. The tests themselves were, frankly, gruesome. 2 subjects were used: human cadavers and live animals, mostly cattle and a couple horses. Having read the entire report myself, I'm quite certain very few of you want me to repeat it in great detail, but we do need to understand why the US finally settled onto the .45, so I have some visual aids. First, here is our cadaver, who, according to the reports, was hung by the head. I've seen other authors claim it was the neck, but the report says the head, and I don't think it matters that much in this scenario anyway. They would take a cadaver, they would suspend it off the floor so that it could swing freely, and then they would actually put a barrel full of sawdust behind the cadaver in order to catch any bullets that might overpenetrate. Then they would fire at various parts of the cadaver, the joints or long sections of the arm, areas that had to do with locomotion, or just anything non-vital in order to see what sort of effect they would have on those regions. When they did so, they would make sure to measure the amount of motion that was imparted into the cadaver. So if you hit at the wrist and it swung back like this, of course it wouldn't stay like my model, but they would mark this distance and it would settle on down. And that way they hope to be able to find how much motion was imparted to this particular cadaver by that particular round at that particular point. The shots were also made at 3 ranges, just ahead of the muzzle for close range, 37.5 yards for medium range, and 75 yards as the extreme long range. On the whole, impacts on soft tissue created very little movement, practically none. Hits on joints could vary a bit, but also didn't exactly send anything flying. The best results were always hits on bone, since the bullets were generally halted and all of their energy was transferred into the cadaver. In the end, this test overwhelmingly favored larger diameter, heavier bullets, especially unjacketed ammo. Since complete penetration created less swing, the smaller bullets, and especially the fast ones, which used hard jackets for reliable feeding, didn't create a good impression at all. Notably, the .455 hollow point bullet was especially effective at shorter ranges. However, it was found that at 75 yards, it barely had enough energy to pierce bone, which disappointed Thompson and LaGarde. After the swinging tests, the bullets were collected and examined for deformation. The cadavers were x-rayed and dissected in order to survey the damage to tissue, muscle, and bone. And, well, again, this all favored slow-moving, heavy, large bullets. Next, they turned to testing on live animals. These were, for the most part, cattle. There we go. It was decided that shots to the vitals, so like the brain or the heart or the spine, were effective for all of the cartridges. Therefore, emphasis was put on the effect of shots to non-vitals. So they would do their best to take similar shots on various bovines for each cartridge. For example, they would say shoot through both lungs or shooting through the intestines. These shots were taken one at a time, and as the first shot was made, a timer was begun. They would measure usually the minutes it would take for the subject to eventually expire. Now, given the sheer size of the cattle, they were larger than this, they would usually have to make a number of follow-up shots. And on occasion, with smaller calibers, they would end up timing out and terminating the subject with the help of local workmen and a big old hammer. Probably harder than this one. They would do a series of quick fire tests, quickly firing the rounds at short range, attempting to dispatch the enemy moo cow as fast as possible. Although, I'm going to be honest, plenty of livestock kept on living for surprisingly long through all of these disruptions. I should also say the live tests included a couple of horses shot with exotic man-stopper rounds, and in one case, an exploding bullet. It was very effective. Thompson and LaGarde filed the results of their testing in March of 1904. The summary? No matter the cartridge, hitting vitals was critical, so troops should be especially drilled in making those particular shots. Second to that, the ideal pistol cartridge was an unjacketed, slow-moving, heavy, and large diameter. If the adoption of an automatic pistol required a jacketed bullet, it should have a thin tip and soft core. For anyone curious, the winning cartridge was the .476 Enfield. The standard was set. The US should not adopt another handgun cartridge less than .45 caliber, and in that the British had a minimum of 40, Colt was going to have to abandon hopes of any sort of Marshall 38 ACP, which was really just as well because attempts to develop a 41 ACP had resulted in failure. The locking system and layout of the Colt 1902 just couldn't handle the extra recoil. and would beat itself to death. There was certainly no hope for a more powerful 45, which means they would have to make more significant changes. There are signs that even before the LaGarde experiment was over, Colt had seen fit to begin work on a 45 automatic Colt pistol cartridge. Supposedly, as early as February of 1904, they had specifications sent over to Union Metallic Cartridge. This was likely thanks to their close contact with John T. Thompson. In need of some fresh engineering, Colts returned to the previous pistol's inventor, John Moses Browning, who we've covered in explicit detail already. This time around, Browning chewed on several possible solutions. One was a new rotating barrel, probably revisiting his much earlier patent. 3 other designs were attempted to replace some or all of the cam links with simple cam blocks. None of these were acceptable either. In September of 1904, 2 .38 caliber Model 1902 pistols were shipped from Colts to the Browning brothers. Both pistols would be considerably transformed, but the most meaningful change was in the locking action that John Moses Browning finally settled on. The key difference can be seen here in Browning's 1905 patent. The original pistol put strain directly on the camming links, which would fail under strain from the larger 45 cartridge. Browning introduced a system of locking and blocking, in which the locking lugs wrap around under the barrel. Actually, they're triangular shaped now, and they meet grooves in the frame. When the barrel recoiled rearward, these lugs took the brunt of the impact, keeping the force off the links. With the locking system worked out, Browning further reworked his 2 prototype pistols into 2 distinct configurations. Serial 13344 was obviously influenced by his work on the Colt 1903 32 ACP pocket pistol. Although much larger, this still incorporated a shrouded hammer and grip safety. Serial 13365 remains somewhat more true to the original form. It's hard to say when each change was made to these guns as a whole, but in the end, this one kept the external hammer, now spur-shaped. The checkered serrations at the front of the slide were actually still retained from the previous 1902. The hold open appears to have been improved, no longer split like the 1902. This would obviously go on to be the immediate precursor to our gun today. Now, while all that was in the works, Colt would receive their new cartridges from UMC in March of 1905. This began a series of more incremental improvements. The original cartridge, 45 caliber, 200 grain bullet, 5.5 grains of bullseye powder, used a pinched case, a sort of cannelore recommended by Browning. This allowed for proper seating of the bullet rapidly. Colt adjusted the powder down to 5.1 grains of bullseye, and in April of 1905 ordered 1 million of these little babies. Tweaking of the prototype pistols would be far enough along early in 1905 to begin tooling up for their manufacture. By the middle of 1905, they began to assemble the line, and the factory drawings seemed to show up in about August. That would actually seal the pattern for Colt's new handgun, making it the military model of 1905. That's this gun here. So I think we can finally get a closer look. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we finally have the original Colt 45 semi-automatic pistol, the model 1905. And by the way, we finally have a stub hammer. I'm excited. We've done this series kind of backwards in some ways, but let's do a quick comparison. So here is our previous 1902, and you may notice this grip has fattened up a lot, and we've lost some barrel length, which means we're pulling a lot of mass back towards the rear. That probably will improve the balance that the military was so upset about. We're also shooting the big honkin' 45 cartridge now, which explains again why this got so thick. Let me get this guy out of the way. Because we still have a lot of the same features. This gun has a slide operation hammer fire, so let's go ahead and we lock open on empty thanks to this stop and slide release. So if we were to load our magazine with fresh rounds, click, and then we're ready to rock and roll one-handedly. This is actually an improvement over the Luger if we think about it. Last time we talked about the pocket model and with the Luger and how the Luger was set up for one-handed controls. The one thing it didn't have was that easy release on the shooter's thumb, which is really nice. So we, of course, like I said, have the detachable box magazine. This is still the same old heel release, push and go. This magazine right here is a reproduction that we were using in order to shoot the gun. We have the stub hammer, which is the first time we've managed to see this, which is, you know what, let's take a moment to appreciate it. Now I can finally show you guys the proper evolution of these pistols, one that we haven't been able to do before, because we had the 1900 with its high spur hammer. As a matter of fact, let me show you that. I mean, look how tall we said it was really awkward. Mae didn't care for it at all, right? Then they went over to this stub, which is much shorter and easier to handle from the shooter's hand, right? The stub is greatly preferred over the original. But when they went to the military with this particular gun, they eventually wanted a spur. And this would be the final version of spur, which we're actually going to see introduced on our next episode in this series on our way to the Colt 1907. But we've seen this sort of later spur on now the 1902 that we managed to borrow and on the 1903 that we managed to borrow. So don't be confused. Originally, the 02s and 03s would have had this stub, and the 1905 originally would have had this stub, and eventually transitioned to using this. But we finally get to see all three hammer types, so I was a little excited. These new triangularly shaped slide serrations would also be introduced on the 1905 and then later applied to other pistols. We've seen them before, but this is where they actually originate from. They were moved from the front of the gun from the old 1902 military back to here, and instead of being that sort of soft plunge milling, they're nice and sharp, and they're shaped in one particular direction. As a matter of fact, not a lot of sound, a lot of sound. Not a lot of sound, a lot of sound. That's because they're biased in a particular direction, which means it makes it very easy to rack the slide, to get bite on your fingers. This shape for cutting a slide is still popular on a lot of guns today. This ended up being standard for many, many, many decades. And it works for good reason. It's very aggressive about grabbing your fingers, which is what you want when you're working something like this. The 1905 is also responsible for introducing a new slide hold open and release. It looks almost identical to the old one, but instead of having a split down here and therefore self-springing, self-biasing, it has a spring down underneath that is going to push up on this operation. It's smoother to the outside and it can't fill with grit and dirt. We've actually never seen the split ones because these again were refitted to other guns as they were introduced, and so our 1902 that's later production never had that split. Now, unique to this gun is an external extractor. Previously, these were nested in the slide, but this long extractor was thought to be a little stronger and easier to replace, and we'll see how that goes in trials later on. Also note our ejection port, and let me get that more centered. Look at our ejection port that bottoms out right at the bottom of that extractor. That's because the US was looking for more vertical ejection, which isn't perfect, but they didn't want it throwing it hard right. I'm not even really sure why they were so worried about it, other than a fear of sort of pinging the next officer or soldier in the line. However, with pistol fire, I'm not sure. Now, Colt never did a mold for hard rubber grips for this particular pistol, probably because they never saw that many sales. Instead, it's standard to find them with checkered wood. Now, disassembly on this guy is the same as ever. We push our button in, let our key fall free, and then we pull our slide all the way off to the rear, although we gotta make sure we get past that hold open. Oof, we're clear. However, we're gonna see some slight differences in the locking system. It can be a little difficult to see, but our locking lugs are going all the way around and taking on a triangular shape at the bottom. We can see this better in our animation if I'm honest, but just so you know, when this recoils, those three lugs at the bottom meet three grooves in the upper portion of the frame, and they form an abutment that keeps the pressure off of the links, and therefore means that we're not distorting them as we go. Also, kind of fun to this pistol, if you're more familiar with the 1911, is that we have a one-piece feed ramp. The entire feed ramp is coming along with the barrel. I know some of you guys that like the more modern 45 are a little jealous of that feature sometimes. Now for what we can't see, well, let's get a look inside with one of Bruno's animations.
Before we load, note the magazine catch, located in the heel of the pistol. Powered by the tail of the combination spring, it locks into the back of the magazine body when fully inserted. To ready the pistol, we must manually retract the slide and then release. This chambers the first round and readies the hammer. The trigger is set up for a linear pull, which doesn't directly tip the sear. Instead, it acts on this, the disconnect. When in the raised position, the disconnect's lower wings make contact with the sear. So, pulling the trigger pushes the disconnect, which tips the sear, releasing the hammer. The outer two tines of the combination spring press on the sear, constantly biasing it into the hammer. The central tine of the combination spring presses on the disconnect. When the trigger is released, this spring returns the trigger and pinches the disconnect back upwards. The disconnect can only rise if a notch in the slide is correctly aligned, making this an effective out-of-battery safety. Now, let's watch it more carefully. We pull the trigger, tip the disconnect, and sear. The pistol fires, and the slide recoils, which shoves the disconnect down. Now the trigger is no longer tipping the sear, so it springs back into the path of the hammer. And even as the slide returns, the disconnect is now trapped under the sear. It is only freed when we release the trigger. This prevents fully automatic fire, or even worse, hammer follow resulting in misfire. This rearmost flat spring powers the hammer, which is of simple, single-action construction, a bearing for the spring and two notches. Presently, it's at full cock. However, it can be lowered to half cock, as a sort of safety. In this position, the hammer cannot reach the firing pin and must be manually recocked to fire. Like the military model of 1902, this firing pin is inertial, meaning it takes a sharp slap of the hammer in order for it to reach the primer. A dedicated coil spring keeps the firing pin rearward at all other times. Finally, we can look at the major change to the Colt automatics introduced on this model of 1905, the locking lug design. These three still fit into grooves in the top of the slide. While these lugs are nested upwards, the barrel and slide are locked together. When lowered, the slide and integral breech block are free to travel on alone. The requisite drop is achieved by these two swinging links. As the slide and barrel travel rearwards together, these links, locked to the frame, pull the barrel down, away from the slide, and out of lock. The problem with the previous design was that at this point, the barrel's rearward movement was halted by the links and their fittings, straining them terribly. As the slide returns, the breech face shoves the barrel forward once more, and the links force it to rise back into lock. The 1905 preserves its links thanks to the new lower lugs, shaped and reinforced, specifically to arrest the movement of the barrel by falling into matching grooves in the frame. By the way, the slide is being returned by this recoil spring and plunger set in the frame. Nearly there, our extractor pulls the case from the chamber, and its corresponding fixed ejector forces it out. Finally, like the 1902, with the last round expelled, the follower raises the hold-open lever, catching in a notch on the slide, locking it rearward on empty. Alright, let's go shoot it.
There is one for whom I'm sighing, do I have to tell you? All life I have been trying to discover one like you. So completely that I wonder why you do. I'd like to ask discreetly, has your mother
Recoil.
Big bullet. Now, I know you're all excited to hear about the military trials of this particular pistol, but before any of that could be started, Colt actually began production. The strategy here was twofold. One, the market should be able to carry the cost of development, and two, having production already spun up meant that any sort of martial adoption and large contracts were more likely, because we could just promise you tens of thousands of them. At the very least, they would be ready to rapidly deliver any batch orders of field trial guns. The hand-assembled nature of most of Colt's competition would suffer a number of problems due to their small-scale manufacture, so this was a smart move. Fun fact, you can learn more about how these pistols were made thanks to the May 1906 copy of Machinery magazine. I'll actually put a link to the scan of this down in the description. The first commercial pistol started shipping in December of 1905. Interestingly, only the very early pistol still had the marking Browning's patent. That's because a letter from John Browning in January of 1906 released Colt's patent firearms from having to display his name, so it was reduced to just plain patented. Colt's favorite ad host, Shooting and Fishing magazine, didn't run an article on the new .45 pistol until February of 1906, with ads arriving in April. It's worth mentioning Colt did try to interest both consumers and the military in a detachable holster stock for this particular pistol. However, this proved an unpopular option in both arenas. Only 440 were cut for a stock, and only 408 were sold with the actual accessory. Colt would also target private purchase officer sales, particularly in Britain, where some were sold through Wilkinson Sword. The vast majority of British-proof guns also sport a fixed lanyard loop on the left side. These were a solid wire type and made use of a shortened left grip in order to fit the piece. The British would also be the first to seriously consider the new automatic, their first test of which was in November of 1905, using what was likely a pre-production example. Another test was undertaken at Whale Island in April of 1906, then at the School of Musketry, Hythe. Rough usage tests at Woolwich in January of 1907 lured in 50 more pieces, which shipped in May of 1907, which saw further testing in June. Ultimately, these trials would start to merge with other automatic tests that we've covered before in our show, so check out, say, our Webley self-loader episode if you're curious. Ultimately, the 1905 would not serve with the Empire, but US Ordnance was definitely interested. I mean, the gun was effectively designed for their exact interest, right down to that cartridge, which is where we have to rewind the clock a little bit and revisit our friends in the US Army. In August of 1905, Chief of Ordnance General Crozier directed the Frankfurt Arsenal to design a new cartridge, suitable for a revolver or automatic pistol. It was to be .45 caliber with a .230 grain bullet, jacketed such that the jacket should mushroom on impact. Muzzle velocity was to average 800 feet per second. The cartridge would require some back and forth over the next few months, but a preliminary sketch was ready in late January of 1906. This was a singular cartridge with both an extractor groove and a rim. It was terrible. The groove was unnecessary for revolvers, and the rim was too big to reliably feed in automatics, and yet also too small for reliable ejection in contemporary ejector star style revolvers. Crozier rejected this cartridge and asked Frankfurt to develop two replacements, one for a revolver and one for an automatic. This process went a lot faster, and the two cartridges were ready in a matter of days, although, as we'll see, at least one mistake was made. Notably, the .45 pistol cartridge would chamber fine in the commercial Colt 1905 pistol that was already in the market, and we know the case length was suggested by Colts. How very convenient. Frankfurt was ordered to produce 10,000 of each cartridge type, beginning their work in April of 1906 and finishing in July. Even before the work was completed, though, it was noted that firing in certain revolvers often resulted in the bullet slipping forward and jamming the action. The seating cannelure was eliminated. However, it was found that they then didn't need the full 20,000 cartridge order, so production was halted shortly after anyway. Now you're probably asking yourself, why did the government need so many cartridges when they had no handguns? Well, that's because, once again, they were hosting a trial. This time, however, they were providing the ammunition. This would force inventors to comply with their requirement. Chief of Ordnance Crozier sent out letters of invitation to various manufacturers and independent inventors in early 1906. Included were technical drawings of the cartridge and load data. Ordnance would furnish ammunition for the trials, and Frankfurt would sell them the same cartridge for development work, $2.86 per 100. The actual testing was to begin on September 12, 1906, but this would actually get pushed back several times. Now, a fair few inventors were invited, but submissions only came in from certain manufacturers. Colts, Savage, Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionfabriken, Smith & Wesson, Bergman, and Webley. Two independent inventors also did show up, William Noble and Samuel Merrill. The trials focused on issuing the new pistol to the cavalry. There were obvious concerns for artillery and other use, but the cavalry had been the most picky. To be fair, in this era, cavalry was almost always the chief concern of any handgun program. And just so we have some idea of Ordnance's expectations, we have some notes from Captain John T. Thompson on what he felt would make a good automatic service pistol. This list was actually made before the trials letter went out, but it's a bit less awkward for us to cover it now. He started with must-have features. 1. It should be simple and strong. 2. It should not be a carbine or stocked pistol, just a plain old-fashioned handgun, please. 3. The action should not be able to fire until the breech block is closed fully. 4. A safety lock or hammer with a rebound firing pin should be placed so that it can be operated by the thumb. 5. The breech block should remain open after the last round is fired. 6. A magazine capacity of at least 6 rounds. 7. A caliber not less than 45. Well, they had that covered by the rules of the trial. 8. A bullet not less than 250 grains, although this was already down to 230 by the time of the trial. 9. Muzzle velocity no less than 725 feet per second. 10. The trigger pull should exceed 6 pounds. This was likely a safety measure. Thompson also gave a list of desirable features, though not necessarily required. A grip safety, a slide release, the ability to recock the action without opening the breech, disassembly without tools, a construction that allows parts to be exchanged separately, making repair easier and quicker. Pre-riveted parts or part groups were not advisable. The gun should balance well that's a given. And it is preferable that a pistol have a locking action, as in not a blowback. A separate magazine or clip, a one-piece breech bolt or breech block is also preferable. Yeah, I'm thinking he was working pretty closely with Colt, because that's just about a checklist for this 1905, isn't it? I mean, not everything, but a lot of it. Look at it. This is an actual ordnance photo of the 1905 used in the trial. Well, one of two. This was the official trials gun, a standard commercial 1905 with an added lanyard, just like they had offered the British. Colt had also brought along a sample 1905 with a spur hammer. This was not, however, tuned to the government ammo, which may have been an advantage because apparently that ammunition was hot garbage. In the months preceding the trial, each competitor would purchase hundreds of rounds from Frankfurt, and the majority of them registered complaints about the quality of that ammunition. To my knowledge, the ammo issue was never really resolved or necessarily investigated all that much before the competition itself, which, like I said before, was repeatedly postponed from September to late October because necessary officers were away on maneuvers, from October to December for no reason given. And then from November until January, this one was at the request of Georg Luger, who needed to finalize and ship his particular pistol. So, on January 15th, representatives from the infantry, cavalry, artillery, and ordnance all got together, along with representatives for each of the pistols, well, most of them. Savage, Merrill, and Bergman were actually still absent at this point. With the board finally convened, the trials were able to begin, and they very quickly realized that it was a disaster. Finally experiencing the Frankfurt ammo firsthand, the board decided that it was worthlessly inconsistent, and most notably, the primer depth varied greatly. Also, the revolver cartridges were way too hot. That was because Frankfurt had done their revolver powder load such that it would hit about 800 feet per second when chambered in a modified 45 long Colt revolver. That's a lot of extra chamber room. So when you design a wheel gun explicitly for the new cartridge, that power stacks up. Oops. On the 21st, authority was granted for the use of any ammunition conforming to the specifications of the Ordnance Department in regards to bullet size, weight, and velocity. But of course, it's a tall order to have everyone just go somehow buy or make what is effectively a custom prototype cartridge for their trial guns in a hurry. On the 26th, the tests were halted so that the competitors could arrange ammunition. This pause allowed a few more entrants to actually show up for the competition. Ordnance then had Frankfurt hand sort their cartridges, inspecting for critical dimensions and recycling the rest. Apparently, out of 9,482 automatic pistol cartridges, only 3,730 had proper dimensions. Amazing. Even so, this gets worse. Testing resumed March 20th, and we can now finally get a look at our contestants, all in .45 caliber, of course. Each had their own special faults, but let's start with the obvious. The Colt New Service and the Smith & Wesson New Century were excellent revolvers in a pistol fight, so we won't put a lot of time in explaining them. They had their own testing program, and both designs have their own episodes that we've done before anyway. The remaining pistols underwent a specific series of tests. Thankfully, we know what they were. 1. Examination of pistol as to design. 2. Special examination of safety features. 3. Disassembly and reassembly, timed. 4. The number of parts and springs and their construction. 5. Tools required to disassemble. 6. 20 rounds fired by the inventor to observe the operation of the pistol. And this is actually where we start to lose some of the competitors. Bergmann's pistol was the first to cave. An attempt was made to fire it for basic demonstration, but the hammer was incapable of detonating the Frankfurt primers. No rounds were fired. And I'm even told these rounds were made especially for the Bergmann. Noble had actually submitted 2 pistols, one single and one double action. Both were considered too crudely manufactured, and only some tentative shooting was attempted before they were disqualified. Perhaps a handful of rounds fired, it's unclear from the extremely cursory notes. They wanted them gone. Alright, back to the testing. 7. Mean bullet velocity at 25 feet. 8. Accuracy and penetration at 75 feet. 9. Rapidity with accuracy. This was done with a large target at 100 feet. 3 magazines were to be expended, the time to complete and the number of hits were counted. 10. Rapidity at will, same as before but without counting the hits. 11. Endurance firing of 500 rounds, cooling allowed after every 50 rounds. This is where the White Merrill pistol was disqualified, having suffered repeated and numerous failures. Total rounds fired, 211. 12. They would measure the muzzle velocity again. 13. 12 rounds fired with reduced charges, ranging from 10 to 25% less power. 14. Excessive charges, 5 shots with 25% hotter ammo. 15. Pierced primer testing with rigged ammo. 16. Fine sand and dust testing. 17. Rust. All oils were stripped and the pistol intentionally rusted for 22 hours before firing again. Interesting point, they would boil the gun in a solution of soda and then place it in a solution of sal ammoniac, which, if you're Scandinavian, you know, is actually fairly delicious. Oh god. The final test likely killed the Luger. While it had been suffering a moderate number of failures to properly feed or lock home, following the rust test, all 14 rounds had to be manually cycled until the gun was re-oiled, after which it ran fine. Still, the overall report was that it was felt the toggle lock lacked a certainty of action. 1,022 rounds were fired. The Webley Fosbury was something else entirely. It managed to complete the testing, but wasn't considered as desirable as an actual automatic. Without a loader and with most of the same issues as a revolver, it wasn't considered for adoption. Total rounds fired were minimal, 620. As you can tell, the testing would leave us with 2 remaining competitors, Savage's 45 and the Colt 1905. Oh god, the saliva. Okay, just put that there. I'm going to cover the details of those 2 guns on our next episode in the path to the 1911, which isn't going to be our very next episode. Sorry folks, it's a lot of work and we're still looking to fill some gaps in our loaners. Also, the next pistol, the 1907, is basically a modified 1905 in response to the first trial. I'd like to give it the due consideration that it deserves. Suffice it to say, however, both the Colt and the Savage performed well enough for further consideration, and both with modifications though. So Colt's hope of having the already in production .45 caliber military model being adopted in large numbers was, well, that was effectively dashed. We'll see it worm out slowly next time. Now this is Colt's patent firearms we're talking about. They're going to make whatever money they can on this investment, so commercial sales would continue, which, like all of our other pistols, led to changes. Fairly quickly, the ejection port would be enlarged. This assured better feeding. And, like just about every other Colt automatic of the era, the 1905 would see its hammer change. It had started with the 1902 style stub, and because the US favored the later spur style, they would start producing it for their 1907 pistols and beyond. Why make 2 hammers when you can just add the spurs to the others? As parts were used up, this transition occurred. That happened around the 3,600 unit range, likely in the spring of 1908. Manufacture of the 1905 only lasted through 1910 for fairly obvious reasons. No need to have two 45s. Of course, having half a dozen 38s was okay. Weird. Actually, the introduction of the Model 1911 would prompt renaming the former 45 caliber military model to avoid confusion, hence the now common Model 1905 moniker. A short production life definitely limited the numbers of this pistol. However, it was also fairly unpopular. Even with manufacture finished in 1910, it would take until nearly the end of 1917 to sell off their remaining stock. I guess the new cartridge was a bit too much for the commercial market. Serial production only ran up to 6,210, which we can assume is the maximum possible production, although given the need for demonstration pieces, cutaways, or just plain manufacturing mishaps that have previously created gaps in serials, it's likely that the actual number is just a little bit lower, making this a very rare Colt automatic. There's also some evidence that the 1905 was the least mechanized production line at Colt's. This period article seems to spell out a perfectly modern manufacturing process, one Colt was proud enough to share publicly. But of all the automatics, the 1905 seemed to display the most variation in their weight and other very minor features. Now that could be a sign that there was more hand fitting, or it could be a sign of all the tweaking that was going on due to US trial considerations. And that's something we'll cover a little bit later. For now, let's go ahead and get this in the hands of Mae and see how she feels about the military Model 45. All right, once more, we've made room for Mae.
Yes, we have.
And we have a new handgun. Well, I've been talking about it for probably an hour, but...
It's so much more different.
Yes. Well, to be fair, stylistically, it's actually quite similar to the 1903 in terms of scale.
Look at that.
I consider that thing to be closer in scale to this than it is to the previous 1902 model.
You know, it is pretty dang near spot on in terms of scale, but there's
it's like somebody grabbed the corner, held shift, and dragged out on this guy, because it just sort of pooped up from a roughly 9mm to 45.
Right, we have gone up in cartridge, which is... Wait, not 9mm. We went up to from 38.
Yeah, but this is dimensionally very similar to 9mm.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay, yeah. But no, basically, yeah, it's basically like someone took Control-T in Photoshop and just went beep, and then went beep, and then that's all they did.
Well, like I said, if you hold shift in the corner, you could get them both.
Oh.
It scales together.
I don't think it's scaled like
it holds the ratio.
I know it holds the ratio, but I don't think
this is important Photoshop information.
I don't think ratio-wise, it's actually, you could have just done that perfectly. I do think they basically
elongate. Here it is, yeah.
We're taking this to Photoshop, and we're going to see.
No. I can't wait to see that edit.
Matt.
So, what do we got ergonomically? What's in your hand now?
Well, this effectively feels, like you said, it does feel a lot like the 1903, and the 1902 had a weird baby together, and they created here the 1905.
I think it feels like the 1903 went to Thanksgiving dinner.
Actually, yeah, it does feel like it basically widened in some areas. That's essentially it. Because we've gone back to that 1902 grip, and I understand, bigger cartridge, we have to get the bigger grip in order to account for the extra size in the rounds, but the thickness there is so much more different. We lost that narrowness.
Thicker.
Yeah.
Straighter, all the way to the end.
Yes.
Yes.
All those things.
These are things we like.
Okay, sure. But what is this? Othais, is this your favorite feature in the world?
Oh, it done locked open. I like that you thumbed the lock open, but the mag's empty, so it was going to do that for you anyway.
I would have done that anyway.
And you got the slide release.
I know. That's kind of nice. Not a bad little feature. So we got that back from the 1902. So we've gone back a little bit and gone fours for the increase in the cartridge. Look at that.
Well, from the military's perspective, and from Colt's developmental perspective, they're not counting the 1903. They didn't even think about it when they're developing this. Although I would argue the length is that's a little suspicious, but I can find
close.
I know. But this came straight off the 1902 from Colt's perspective. It was made off of a modified 1902, and so. The very first prototype, like we saw, still had the cross hatching on the front of the slide. Yeah. So ignore the last episode if you're thinking of this in terms of military, right?
Right.
Okay, so fatter 45.
Yep. We've gone back. We've got our bob hammer that we were talking about, like we wanted with the 1903, but we've got this on the 1905.
We finally get to experience the hammer that we were supposed to experience 2 guns ago.
Yep.
How's it feel?
So operating it, it's a bit difficult actually to
You said you wanted it on the 1903.
I wanted it for concealability. So we were talking about that in terms of being a pocket pistol. For the 1903, this is effectively a better fit, I would say.
Okay, ready, set, cock.
No. No.
So not your preferred hammer.
It's not as easy to get a grip around because effectively, I guess they would have left their fingers in the trigger guard. No, that's not comfortable. Can you do that?
Let me see.
I mean, probably. You're.
I'm all that is man.
Man, yes.
I still had to hook
hand.
the toe. Let me see if I can do it without hooking the toe. Oh no,
Let me try hooking the toe. Maybe,
I quite literally have to hook the toe.
let me try hooking the toe. Maybe that's the difference there. So oh my God, that's such a long grip is the problem.
Yes, I have large hands.
Oh, that does make a huge difference though. Okay. Yeah, hooking the toe seems to have been the right answer. So let's see here. It's still not easy. It's like I find a sweet spot and then lose it is the problem.
The problem we have with Mae is she might be the right size for the period, but her hands are still effeminate.
Yeah, they are still having
Got little weak cherub baby hands.
Cherub baby hands.
Little doll baby porcelain china doll
It's
hands.
like 2 a.m. I just want to point out. He's just gone.
All right,
Anyway.
baby hands, how's it going?
I'm not sure I'm a fan of this thickness. This does seem to be rubbing me the wrong way. Stop it. No, don't think of it like that. Literally, I think this thickness is just a bit too... It's a bit too much. You won't stop looking at me with
I'm
that
listening
face.
to you
Yeah.
tell the story.
No,
and I'm
I mean-
imagining the comments as they roll by under this video.
Oh, boy.
Like they always do.
I miss that narrowness that we had from the 1902, the 1900, the 1903. They all felt really good. This one feels just a little too much. Like it's almost
agree.
a little too much for my hand.
So the problem I'm noticing and what Mae's trying to elaborate on is the fact that these are square back pistols. They have a slight rake, but not a strong one like we're used to in the 1911.
If you think of the 1902, even with this style of grip, like that's...
No, but I'm talking about the angle.
Oh, the
And
angle.
so not having an aggressive rake, we're squared up on the gun, and so it's nice to have the gun be nice and narrow, right?
Yeah, it gives you the best,
Also-
most solid grip.
These grips aren't contoured. We've already talked about how they have a sort of double hump to them.
Yeah, it is a bit strange.
Those aren't contoured much better. They're a little bit better than this because they go all the way to the edge.
That's the thing, is that they do go to the edges on this one, so you don't notice it as bad.
Right, and I think going to the girth of 45,
Mm-hmm.
they noticed they had to really profile them to the back, right?
Otherwise, it was just not going to feel right.
Right, and that starts us down the path to having the better contours of the 1911, I think.
think
Especially, I think it collides with the Luger, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But right now, we still very much have the Colt / Browning profile,
Mm-hmm.
and that profile to me feels better in a narrower pistol.
I agree.
Now, so you're intimidated by the girth.
I am intimidated by the girth, but I'm liking some of the features that we got back. So we've got the straight back grip from the 1902 again. Nice, good job. We've got the lock open, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we already covered that.
Yep. If I'm trying to conceal it, I guess the bob hammer's better, but I am
Don't
missing...
care. This is supposed to be a holster gun.
Right, so I think I would prefer that spurred hammer
Which
setup.
was quickly added to this gun,
Right.
very quickly.
Serrations are pretty decent. Sights,
This
kinda
introduced the
same.
serrations. So these are the most positive, proactive serrations.
Right, but we felt those on the 1903, correct?
Yes, but they were added later to that gun. This gun introduced them.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So you
that's
like
right.
them, but they come from this gun.
Okay, gotcha. Well, that aggressive serration really does feel perfect for me.
Okay, so now let's talk about shooting it.
Okay.
Any differences in sighting, trigger pull, hammer, any of that stuff? Does any of it, all that different, really, at all?
Well, no, except larger cartridge, and the day of that shoot, I had just previously shot in .38. So then he handed me this one, and I still remember the first shot. I was a bit startled because I forgot that we had gone up in cartridge for a split second in my mind. So I went, oh, it's from the 1900 lineage. It's going to be this. No.
It's worse than that. It was 38,
Yep.
38, 38.
Didn't we have 450 Adams too?
Yeah, we were shooting some revolver or something that was squeaky.
Right.
And then my favorite is that because the filming episode, the order of the episodes, we're like, we really got to get the high speed footage. So we stopped and
Right.
did the high speed footage. So more than ever, she was shooting 38.
That was the whole day I'd been shooting.
Right. So we're several hours into 38s and getting the shots right.
And
And
we had enough
we were
time.
having problems with the 1900.
Right.
And so we had to keep reshooting that. So you're in like, you had to have been at least 100 rounds into the 38s. And then it's just like, all right, let's go ahead and get the Like,
we had the time. Like, let's get the 1905 and
I'm loading it.
Plus.
I'm loading the mag in front of you, and you just didn't register that's 45.
Well, I mean, I know what cartridges is. I know what's coming, but my brain just had done that thing where it's like, all right, this is the muscle memory, what you've been shooting all day. Let's do it again. No.
And I believe the first thing we shot with it was high speed because we were transitioning high speeds.
Right, yeah. I was definitely not prepared for it. I think it whipped my wrist.
Yes, your wrist folded. We had to refilm that high speed later.
Right.
Because you were just like, "Whoa," and we were just like,
it shouldn't be that.
She was all soft and just like, oh boy.
Yeah, it was
That's
it was
because
something
they don't
startling.
make a 46.
No, they don't make a What does that even mean?
That's what they would say. I carry a 45 because they don't make a 46.
Is that literally something they would say?
You're missing out. You could be making every FUD/boomerism because this is the first 45 ACP.
So this is the first FUD, is what you're saying?
This is the birth of an entire era.
Okay.
Yeah.
How come there aren't that many of them?
Because they invented the 1911.
Oh. Okay.
After that. This wasn't good. You're about to tell us why they went to invent the 1911 because how is that recoil, May?
Special. It was not so. I never really got fully used to it was the problem because I honestly thought, okay, we're gonna keep putting rounds and we're gonna get there throughout the whole day. No, by the end of the day, I still felt like it wasn't manageable with this guy. It's just too much on it.
Yeah.
There's so much snap to that recoil with it that it really doesn't feel like it's anything that you as a shooter you're gonna do some quick realignments with it. It definitely is something that just kind of racks you over the day.
Yeah, it's a good thing that they designed the cartridge to stop you in one because it's going to be a couple minutes before you can get the second one out.
Not a couple minutes, but yeah, it's going to take you. Yeah, the problem is that the snap with it, the climb, it really just isn't quickly recoverable.
And were the ergonomics helping you out with that at all?
Just like, no, the sights are like they're pretty much the same. Like there's no real crazy difference between them. They could stand to be a little bit deeper and wider in general.
How's that fat grip?
Not the most comfortable, unfortunately. The problem is that it's such a wide set grip that, like we were talking about, the 1902 and all the others, that narrowness that really had with it, with that square back felt really good. But the problem is that you come to this one, you fatten it up, it doesn't feel like you have as much of a solid grip on it in order to keep the purchase that you need to maintain that strength in the grip. So I didn't feel like it was helping any.
I have a confession.
What?
I wanted to love this gun.
Really?
Because it's the original 45, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I mean, there's 45 revolvers, but I'm talking about for 45 ACP, this is the gun, right?
Okay.
It starts the whole thing, and I want to be like, yeah, I'm going to shoot it raw, you know what I mean? And I get like 3 rounds through, and I'm just like, this gun hates my hand.
Yeah, it hurts.
It
just hurts after a while. You're just like, I don't like it.
It doesn't have the mass, it doesn't have the rake of the 1911, it doesn't have the form factor of the 1911.
No.
And can't
wait till we get to the 1911.
Yeah, I can't. Like, the one thing I'm realizing is the 1911 was built around 45.
I need to shoot at least one round through each of the pistols right before I shoot the 1911, just so I can have.
Just so you can be like, boom, ba 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 ba. Boom, ba 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 ba.
Yeah, literally, we could do that.
Okay. Okay, so overall, would you be a fan of using that thing militarily?
Not especially. Just because I feel like, don't get me wrong, the man stopper cartridge, not bad. You know, that's definitely.
You have confidence in the cartridge.
I definitely have confidence in the cartridge. And we've got back that slide lock open. That's pretty critical, I would agree. We don't have any sort of safety, so there's no real.
Well, you have to do that weird carry it either empty or cock the hammer thing, and you really can't cock that hammer.
No, yeah, that's not fun.
Heel release magazine.
Yep. Which, I mean, this one's like the 1903, except this one I think is a little bit worn. Yeah, this one's not the best condition.
Well, that one's actually a repro.
Oh, okay.
And then you have slow follow-up shots.
Right. So, when is the 1907 coming out? Is that one any better?
Do you remember it? Because we're not going to tell you guys, but I don't think we're at the bottom yet.
No, not just yet.
So, no, weirdly, the gun's rare. It's fantastically cool. Mm-hmm. I don't want one now. Like, it is uncomfortable.
I think I'll hold my pennies and wait for a potential opportunity down the road.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll try some stuff.
But this one was loaned to us by Sven. Thank you for the terrible gun that we hate, Sven.
Thank you, Sven. That was, I love the experience. I love being able to try things that I learned so much about, and I've learned how much I hate this gun.
I mean, I would defend myself with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely one you can defend.
I don't want to do the extra motion to draw from a holster.
No.
It's definitely not a concealed gun. And it's so slow at follow-up shooting.
It really is.
I can't... you know what it is, too?
I don't think we can get past that as a problem.
The problem is, as modern shooters, we've handled 1911s. And we know them well enough.
Right.
That I think it's spoiling us because...
You think so? Like, we can't be biased enough because we know what the best product is to come?
I've shot 45 at ACP.
Not spoiling, but come on.
Yeah, I've shot 45 ACP out of a lot of guns. And I shot it first out of a 1911. And I've shot it the most out of a 1911. But, you know, shooting at other guns, it's been fine because they've all been modern.
Right. They've been able to handle the recoil. This one doesn't really do anything to mitigate it for you.
I don't know, other than the other trials pistols, right? The other pistols for this specific trial.
I mean, ergonomically doesn't do anything to mitigate it for you.
There isn't another 45 ACP early semi-automatic, right? For the American, for the modern shooter, for the Americans especially.
Sure.
We experienced 45 ACP at its earliest with the 1911, which was much smarter laid out than this. To go before the 1911, to just have something that's just chambered in 45, but is an archaic design, you get this. And there's only a few thousand of them that sold into the commercial market. I think I said something like 6,000 something. And then the other guns that were in 45 ACP were prototypes. And that's it. So if you think about it in those terms, this is the only way to experience 45 ACP.
Can you imagine this having been your first experience of 45 ACP?
That's what I'm saying. Like, how did they keep going with it?
I bet there'd be people who would be either so entertained just by that snap, or they'd be like, no, this is the worst thing ever. Why would you ever go up to 45 when that's the experience you get with it?
I don't know. But, I mean, you can see the 1911 does not share the frame with this guy.
No, it definitely doesn't.
But we're going to talk about the 1907. We're going to see them try to transition, try to save the pistol, and obviously, we already know the ending of this. It doesn't become this frame at all.
Right.
But we're going to see what they try after this, and then we're going to see them pivoting towards the 1911 after that.
Gotcha.
But that's for later.
Neat.
Not even next episode, because we got something else next episode.
Ha! Fooled you.
Yeah. For anyone curious, the reason we're stretching these out is because the 1907 is the last thing we have, and then we have an air gap.
Yep.
So there's significant changes in like 1909 and 1910, and those are not actually available to us at all. We may have to do an episode without having them in hand, ever.
If anyone has one that they'd be willing to lend us to show and shoot, we would appreciate the lend.
We don't even need to shoot them.
Oh wait, that's right. No, at least be able to see it.
When it comes to like the 09-10 period, those are so few in number. I don't know that I want to shoot one.
Just because of the rarity.
Right, but if you know someone or a collection that has them, maybe point them our way. We'd really like to get our hands on one
so
and
we can
just
really
show it.
Yeah.
Right. And then we can discuss the history around it. But it'd be nice to have some original photos, some original video of actually handling the piece.
Right.
But that's sort of the gap we're trying to make up for, and that's why we're stretching these out so there's the most time for everybody to share them and to tell others about them. So share the episode.
Yes, please.
With everybody that might want to hear about it, and we'll see what we can get done. All right. Anything else, Mae?
Nope, that's pretty much it. Again, thank you, Sven, though, for the lend. I appreciate being able to have this experience and to share it with all of you.
Yep. So you heard it. Mae's 2 week for 45 ACP. Have a good one.
Oh, my God. Good night.
All right, gang, I added this little extra bit to the video because I realized while we were filming it, I'm going to get a lot of emails about this little cow. Just to be transparent, we just grabbed him on Amazon because he was the cutest looking cow and we thought he would soften the blow of explaining the Thompson-LaGarde test. I don't know if this has just been more horrifying because of it. I'm sorry. This particular one has been stolen by Suze. She has named him LaGarde and will not let him go. I was lucky to get to film him at this moment. If for some reason you want one of these, we have no control over making them. We just bought it on Amazon, but I've included the link in the description. So I guess knock yourself out. Thanks for joining us and have a good one.